Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So how often do you get into a fight where the enemy is surprised? Can you make it occur consistently? Enter Pass Without Trace. So Pass Without Trace is a second level spell. Druids can get it at level 3, so can Shadow Monks. Rangers can get it at level 5, Lord Bard could get it at level 6, and Earth Genasi can get it at level 1, or level 5 if you're using Monsters of the Multiverse. You cast a spell, and for up to an hour, as long as you're concentrating, your party gets a flat plus 10 to their dexterity stealth check results. In addition, you don't leave tracks or traces of passage, and you can't be tracked except by magical means. Basically, for the duration, each creature of your choice within 30 feet gets the benefits of the spell. Now, this part I can see reading two different ways. The first is that the caster chooses the targets of the spell within 30 feet when the spell is cast. The second way is that the caster basically has like a 30-foot aura where they can provide the benefits to the creatures within range. I personally read it that you need to remain within 30 feet of the caster, but I'm happy enough with either reading. Either way, plus 10 is a massive bonus. So the thing is, when your party is checking to see if they surprise an enemy, they make dexterity stealth checks, and if those stealth checks universally beat an enemy's passive perception score, that enemy is surprised at the start of combat. In order to beat even a modest passive perception score, every party member's result needs to be at least decent, and Pass Without Trace can make that certain for some characters, and at least far more likely for the 8 dexterity non-stealth proficient heavy armor wearer. And getting surprise over an enemy is a massive advantage. A surprised creature can't move or take actions in their first turn of combat. They can't even take a reaction until their first turn is over. Surprise basically can make a challenging combat dead easy. So I hear a lot these days that by casting Pass Without Trace and being stealthy, a party should be able to achieve surprise in combat fairly regularly, except against enemies with unusually high passive perceptions. A lot of players and DMs don't know the rules for surprise or all the relevant rules for surprise, which is totally understandable because they are, first off, poorly written, and they aren't even located all in the same place. Like, hey designers, maybe with the player's handbook revision you're working on, have one place we can go to find out how this mechanic works, please. But if your DM does know all the relevant rules, then it's just not as simple, as a good stealth score means you'll likely get surprise. So I've done the rules hunting, and by the end of this video, you'll know all the relevant rules for surprise. And I am afraid to say, why as a player you maybe shouldn't expect to even get the surprise check in the first place, even if you're being stealthy, regardless of how high your stealth bonus is. You're also going to learn just how convoluted it is to even gather all the rules required to determine whether a surprise check should occur. If you'd like to support this channel, there is a link to my Patreon in the video description. Today I'd like to thank some top-level patrons: Dewey Cheatham and Howe, DM Michael 7000, Douglas Reynolds, Drew Terry, Eric Harvey, Eric Wasserman, FBK05, Gishlife, Glenn Wilson, Gakamaru, Hendry, Hoerby, Ian Johnson, I'm Not K, Jay Gemmel, Jack Harper, James Makla, James Sprague, James Thomas, Jason Klein, Jeff Williams, Chad Zan, John Matera, Jonathan Lexi, and Joseph Robideau. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the actual rules entry for surprise. This is in Chapter 9 of the Player's Handbook with the rules for combat. The DM determines who might be surprised. If neither side tries to be stealthy, they automatically notice each other. Otherwise, the DM compares the dexterity stealth checks of anyone hiding with the passive wisdom perception score of each creature on the opposing side. Any character or monster that doesn't notice a threat is surprised at the start of the encounter. Okay, so we're already into some wording that's not super clear. Like, when does this roll occur? Is this at the start of combat? Or did that stealth roll that we made to sneak up on the enemy in the first place count? That much we can determine by going back to the order of combat rules. Yeah, we're going to be jumping around rules a lot. So according to the order of combat, surprise is the first step when a combat encounter begins. Before initiative, before establishing positions, which if you're playing on a grid is an unnecessary step. Okay, so after the combat begins, but before initiative is rolled. Got it. let's go back to the surprise rules. The second part is just some more poor wording. It says, any character or monster that doesn't notice a threat is surprised. Presumably, the threat they're referring to is the threat of combat, not specifically just the creatures that are hiding. Otherwise, only one party member would need to hide, and the enemy would be surprised against the entire party. So, we know how this should work, but they could have worded that better. But the part here that we need to investigate is right here. In order to make the check in the first place, you need to be hiding. Not moving stealthily, hiding. These are two different things. And we're not looking at the stealth roll we may have made earlier. This one, if it occurs, is at the start of combat. And of course, the rules for hiding are in another part of the book entirely. Chapter 7, using ability scores, so let's go there. Here we are, hiding. Right here it says, you can't hide from a creature that can see you clearly. Now, what does that mean? Partial obscurement? Heavy obscurement? That's not specified in this section at all. So we have to infer, which is crazy since other rules in the game seem to make reference as if it's specified what level of obscurement you need. Thankfully, those other rules do exist. Otherwise, we would be guessing right now. So here's the invisible condition. It says for the purpose of hiding, the creature is heavily obscured. So obviously, heavy obscurement allows hiding, as does the invisible condition. Let's move on. Now to the skulker feat. Here's the skulker feat. You can try to hide when you are lightly obscured from the creature from which you are hiding. So what this tells us is being lightly obscured isn't enough for hiding, unless we have this feat. Or there are a couple other exceptions to the requirement of heavy obscurement. The Lightfoot Halfling is one case that has an exception. Naturally Stealthy says they can attempt to hide even when they are obscured only by a creature that is at least one size larger. Now if you're wondering how much obscurement a creature of at least one size larger than you provides, obviously not heavy obscurement or this trait wouldn't exist. Okay, on to the Wood Elf. Mask of the Wild says that you can attempt to hide even when you're lightly obscured, as long as that obscurement is from foliage, heavy rain, falling snow, mist, or other natural phenomena. What exactly constitutes natural phenomena? I guess that ends up in the hands of the DM. Now it is pretty clear that normally heavy obscurement or invisibility is required for hiding, but there are some ways in which light obscurement through racial traits or feats can provide the ability to hide. So now we need to talk about obscurement. So we're rules hopping again. Now we're on to chapter 8, to vision and light. So a given area may be lightly or heavily obscured. In a lightly obscured area, such as dim light, patchy fog, or moderate foliage, creatures have disadvantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight. In other words, you can see into a lightly obscured area, but it's more difficult. A heavily obscured area, such as darkness, opaque fog, or dense foliage, blocks vision entirely. A creature effectively suffers the blinded condition when trying to see something in that area. In other words, heavy obscurement completely blocks sight. So unless we have an exception, like the Skulker feat, or being a Wood Elf, or being a Lightfoot Halfling hiding behind a creature one size larger than it, then we cannot be seen at all if we wish to be hidden. Okay, so your party is moving stealthily through the bandit's hideout. The druid casts Pass Without Trace on the party. The DM asks for a stealth roll to determine if any bandits can hear them. All the party roll great, and the DM determines they have not been heard. They come up to this door right here and open it. There are 3 bandits inside. The DM determines that combat will be starting right now. So, do we roll for surprise? Well, the previous stealth check would not be used for sure. Surprise checks occur during combat, not beforehand. So that roll was for something else entirely. If the bandits could have heard the party, maybe they could position themselves differently, call for everyone in the hideout to attack at once. Maybe they have potions or spells or something they could prepare, or set a trap, or get behind cover. So that stealth roll was important, but checking for surprise happens right now, if it happens at all. Now we already know that the rules on hiding say you can't hide if you can be clearly seen. We also know, at least after some ridiculous research we shouldn't have had to do, that seen clearly means not heavily obscured. So here is what the bandits can see. We have multiple party members that aren't obscured, so they aren't hidden. So I guess no roll for surprise. But there is something else to consider if we go back to our rules on hiding. It says if you come out of hiding and approach a creature, it usually sees you. Interesting. Usually sees you means that sometimes it doesn't see you. In other words, maybe we can't hide from a creature that can see us clearly, but we might be able to remain hidden from a creature that couldn't see us clearly, but now can. It says that the DM might allow you to stay hidden as you approach a creature that is distracted. I read that as like the creature's looking the wrong way, and maybe can't even see you with peripheral vision, allowing you to sneak up behind them. I mean, that's how I read it, but this is again just really unclear wording. And it's also not totally applicable here. We're at the start of combat. Nobody has approached anyone yet. But we do have party members that are not obscured. So does this count as the case where the DM might allow you to remain hidden? And the answer to that is, yeah, maybe. Like, there must be other exceptions. I mean, if you're hiding in combat, let's say you're a rogue and you're in a tree and you're hiding from the enemy and you shoot at them with your arrow. Well, presumably you can see them, so then they should have at least some view of you. You won't be totally obscured. Yet, I would think any DM is going to give you advantage on that check, and your hiding will not be revealed until after you fired the shot. We're now done with the rules, by the way. They provide you no other guidance beyond what I've already shown you. Personally, if I was the DM, it would depend on a lot of factors. Are these bandits actually distracted by something? Are they looking away from the door? Are they expecting trouble? According to the little guidance we do get, it says that if you come out of hiding, the creature usually sees you. So it probably usually should, but not always. The biggest thing here for me is the very first sentence. The DM decides when the circumstances are appropriate for hiding. The DM decides, not the players. So the DM needs to make the call when this door is opened and combat begins if these characters are treated as hiding. The players don't get to make that call. I mean, technically speaking, rules is written, the DM decides if the circumstances are appropriate for hiding, even if the characters are heavily obscured. Literally, the first sentence of the hiding rules says it's the DM's decision if the circumstances are appropriate, and everything after that is just guidance to help them make that decision. So back to the original question. Will Pass Without Trace give you surprise? The answer is likely, at least some of the time, when the DM determines that circumstances are appropriate. But the player's ability to control these circumstances are very limited. And if the DM determines that the circumstances aren't appropriate, it doesn't matter how big a bonus to stealth your party has, because no surprise roll gets made in the first place. So in other words, your mileage may vary. Personally, I would never recommend making a character built around getting surprise as a way to optimize, since there is too much out of the player's control. And that phrase that the creature usually sees you if you come out from cover, it suggests to me that if your DM actually has really studied these rules, and yeah, a lot haven't, but if they do, I would think that surprise isn't something I would be counting on getting a check for on a regular basis. I think you should try to get surprise whenever you can. It's a huge advantage. So cast Pass Without Trace for sure if you have it, but if your character build requires surprise to be effective, I wouldn't consider that an effective build. Then again, I don't know your DM. You do. What I just went over is how surprise works, and in the end, your DM is supposed to make a decision if surprise is possible based on the circumstances. And if you find your own DM tends to make the decision that surprise is possible most of the time, then yeah, Pass Without Trace is going to be the top way to make sure you succeed on that surprise roll. I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry the rules aren't that specific on when you get to roll for surprise, because they do just throw a lot at the feet of the DM, and then they expect them to figure it out for themselves. And as a player, that means you're not going to have a lot of control. Until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.